Let's go ahead and just pray before we get started. Father, we thank you that, especially today, but any day, we can just enter into your presence of worship and just rest in you and to find our favor. And Father, I do pray as we just speak that it's not about me and it's not about what I'm doing. It's about who you are and what you're doing and the people that you love and that heart you have for your creation. So, Father, I just pray that the words that I would speak would be used to bring encouragement and hope and insight into the work that you're doing, maybe in our lives individually, in our community, but around the world too. And we just thank you for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Della. So you've been waiting in anticipation for the birth of your child. And it's not your first child, you've had other children, but each one is just new and exciting. And when that day comes, and as the days go along, you start realizing something's different. Your son isn't learning to crawl like your other children. He's not moving the same. He doesn't learn to walk. He doesn't learn to speak. And you don't know what to do. You look around your community for help, but instead they just blame you, saying it's your fault. This was a story of Maria and her son Raul. But Maria was a fighter, and she didn't give up, and she found a place several hours away from where she lived. So she would get up at 1 a.m., gather things together in her cinder block house with a dirt floor, strap her 40-pound son Raul on her back, walk 4 hours, sometimes through the rain, through narrow mountain passes, to get to a place where she could catch a bus. And she hoped the bus would stop, because sometimes the bus doesn't stop for people like Maria and her son, because it takes them longer to get on the bus. And another bus might pass, and they could get down and get the next people waiting, and they'd make more money. So she'd wait for a bus, get on the bus, and take another 4-hour bus ride to this town called Chichicastenango in Guatemala. And there was a local physical therapy program run by local people that would give her son 1 hour of physical therapy once a month. And she'd turn around, go back home, 4 hours on the bus, get off the bus, strap 40-pound Raul on her back, walk up and down those mountain passes back to her home. She'd have missed 2 days of work, and she'd have 10 children at home waiting for her. This story's pretty common for people with disabilities, not only in Guatemala, but around the world. In fact, 1 billion people, or 15% of the world's population, has some form of disability. And 1 in 3 people within their lifetime will need some kind of physical therapy, occupational or speech therapy services, whether it's a one-time visit, maybe you hurt your back, or if it's continual, like a child with cerebral palsy. People with disabilities, it's 10 times higher as compared to developed nations. And people with disabilities are some of the most marginalized people in the world. They have decreased health outcomes, decreased levels of education, decreased opportunities for achievement and economic advancement, but they have increased poverty. And unfortunately, the pandemic has only made that situation worse. In fact, in Guatemala, when the clinic I initially started had to shut down and was closed for 9 months, children that had learned how to walk now can't walk because they didn't have somebody to come and help them. So that's why I started an organization called Therapy Clinics International. And so the mission of Therapy Clinics International is we train people in developing nations to provide basic physical therapy for people in their communities. And as we do that, we create relationships with people and look for opportunities to share our hope and faith in Jesus Christ. And we teach the people that we are training to provide the physical therapy to do the same thing. And the vision would be that in every developing nation, starting with Guatemala, there would be one person in the community that we call a rehabilitation promoter that could provide those services, because it's a huge need around the world. But how did all this get started? And that's kind of what we were talking about before. So I want to share you a couple stories. So probably in the 80s, a woman and her daughter had been praying. She felt a need that they were called to the mission field, but her husband wasn't ready. Then one day her husband comes home and said, hey, I think we're supposed to serve as missionaries. I think we're going to go to Mexico. And the woman and her daughter just start jumping up, praising the Lord. And the husband's like, wait, this isn't the reaction I was expecting. I thought you guys were going to be like, what? They're like, we've been praying for this for years. And they had patiently waited for God to change the heart of their dad and husband. And so they loaded up their Suburban and headed to Mexico. And they had some contacts, looking for their place. But nobody in Mexico wanted them to work with them, especially with their 16-year-old daughter that had blonde hair and blue eyes. They felt that was too dangerous and too much of a threat for their organizations at that time. So they returned back to Missouri, where they were from, kind of discouraged and questioning, like, God, I thought you were calling us to missions. What's going on? They were having dinner with somebody one night, and they said, oh, you should go to Guatemala. So with just some paper directions, they loaded up their Suburban again, went back to Mexico, and headed to Guatemala. About this time, our family moved from South Dakota to Texas. Now, talk about a little bit of a culture shock. There were things that I didn't know or things that I didn't know I was doing wrong until I moved to Texas. I learned real quick you had to say yes, ma'am, instead of just saying yeah. I didn't know just saying yeah was so rude and inappropriate. Or that you had to say pecan instead of pecan. Or that it was Burnett Road instead of Burnett. Or that it's Coke, not pop. I don't think I ever bought into everything's bigger and better in Texas, and I was glad that I got there as quick as I could. But I also realized, too, not everybody were cowboys like I was expecting, too. After, growing up watching Dallas, that's my picture of Texas, cowboys and longhorns and horses, but it's just parts of Texas. But through that, I realized, there was differences. And that's when I started kind of realizing, there's cultures, not only between nations, but within regions, within areas. After physical therapy school, when I moved to South Texas, and the guy's like, hey, welcome to South Texas. I'm thinking, it's Texas. Oh, no. South Texas was quite different. It was kind of a little bit more laid back. Oh, we can do it tomorrow. The good old boy system. Quite different from growing up outside of Austin, Texas, which was very, liberal, advancing. Let's keep moving. We got to get this done. And, so I was like, that's interesting. But growing up in Texas, and at that time, the Lady Longhorns were the big basketball team, and I had every vision of being a basketball player. That didn't happen. I ran cross country and track instead. And all growing up, I thought I was going to be a teacher, probably because my dad was a teacher. And my senior year in high school, I was like, oh, man, I don't want to get up in front of people and talk. Okay, side note here, God does change hearts and visions and desires now. I love doing this. If you told me to do this in high school, I'd been like, So she came to speak to us about choosing a career. And she said, you need to pick something you're passionate about. And it's not just about making money. And I thought, I like sports. I like helping people. I'd been injured several times running cross country and track. I'd been to physical therapy. I was like, I'll be a physical therapist. And so I set off on that path to become a physical therapist. And it was in physical therapy school that there were some key moments within my life when I look back. First of all, it dawned on me that I had gone to church my whole life, but I really wasn't a Christian. I hadn't really accepted what Jesus had done for me with his gift on the cross. So I made a choice for myself to follow him and was baptized in the ocean in Galveston in February. And then I also went on a medical mission trip. Actually, before that, after kind of realizing I needed to accept Jesus for myself and follow him. Growing up, I had been born early. And my parents said, oh, but we knew you were going to be fine. And I had always just thought they were just optimistic parents. And it was in physical therapy school. I said, Mom, Dad, what did you mean by that? And they're like, didn't we ever tell you the story? And I'm like, well, no. And they're like, well, no, when you were born, the doctors didn't know if you were going to live or not. They weren't sure if your lungs had fully developed, and, they'd done everything they could, and they just didn't know. And they're like, we'll see. And my dad's like, yeah, I was driving home that night really mad, just like angry at God and just, complaining and talking all in the car. And he said, when I finally got quiet and I drove down the street, and they were living in Castlewood at that time, there were 3 lights on in the neighborhood. In one house, somebody's, I think, son had died in an accident. Another one, their child had been diagnosed with diabetes, and they were young. And another one, something else had happened. And he said, I just felt like God said, look, everybody else has problems. What makes you think you're any different? But don't worry, your daughter's going to be okay. So the next morning, he rushes off to the hospital, and he's like telling my mom, Jennifer's going to be okay. And she's like, I know. And he's like, no. And she's like, no, I know. I was reading my devotion this morning in Hebrews, and I just felt like it's that, I just sensed God saying Jennifer's going to be okay. And he was like, oh, I didn't know this till I was a physical therapy student. And I was a little frustrated, but then I thought, I don't think it would have meant the same either. And also, we went on a medical mission trip with the one of the Christian organizations at the school. And I remember just watching these 2, it was fun with the physical therapy things we did, and I learned too about culture because I was finally oh, they have, tennis elbow, and they just need to ice it, and they just need to do this. And my professor graciously said, Jennifer, do you think they have a refrigerator? I started looking around. She goes, do you think they even have electricity? How are they going to get ice? And it was kind of this awakening of oh, not everybody lives the same as I do either. But there was still a disconnect. It still was church was going to be the thing I did on Sundays, and I was going to work my way up and I was like, I'm going to be a physical therapist, and you're going to be a good professional, and you're going to work yourself up the career ladder. But then I moved to Corpus Christi, got my first job, and God had other ideas. And I ended up at a church. I actually had 2 invitations when I first moved down there, and I went to the church I did just because that was the person that had responded. But I don't think that's a coincidence, because it turned out at that church, there was a new youth minister, and she just happened to be from North Dakota. And she invited me to participate in a Bible study. And I remember after one of those Bible studies, when I realized, she was showing me all the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus that were fulfilled in the New Testament, and then we were looking at Genesis 1:26, and it said, God said, let us make man in our image. And I'm like, whoa, wait, wait. I'm like, you mean Jesus? Jesus was there then? He didn't just show up? And she's like, well, yeah. I'm like, no clue. And it was just this big awakening experience. It's like, oh, wow. And I remember going to work all excited, and I think my receptionist was looking at me like, okay, where have you been? And I got involved in the youth group. I was involved in ministry. And one day she just randomly said, you should go to this missions conference in Illinois called Urbana. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I don't think, because it was 5 days right after Christmas from the 26th to the 31st. And I'm like, I'm working full time. And, we don't get many days off for Christmas. I don't think that's going to work. So I just kind of put it to the side. Well, a few weeks later, I was working, and I just felt like I should call my boss and just ask him. So I called him, and I got the time off. But not only the time off, I got the time off enough to come up early, and we had Christmas at the farm. My grandfather had passed away, and we had all gotten together, and so we were having Christmas together. And I remember Uncle Larry and my dad taking me to the airport, and my dad's like, well, who's going to meet you at this conference? Nobody. No, I know you're traveling from here by yourself, but when you get there, who are you going to meet up with? No, I don't know anybody that's going. And I think both of them were like, okay. And that first night, we walked into an auditorium of 10,000 people. And just the opportunity to worship with that many people was just incredible. I'm like, man, what's heaven going to be like, when we're all worshiping together, if this is just 10,000 people right now? And several things happened during that conference. First, that first night, they said, if you've come by yourself, we want you to stand up. So I stood up, and I looked around, and maybe there were a handful of people and 10,000 people. And the speaker said, there's a reason that you're here. God has something special for you. I was like, okay. Because and then there were like 3 gymnasiums full of different mission sending organizations and ministries, and the opportunity to talk with them and just talk to people, and the life-giving that was, because they, were listening to God as they spoke to me, which I didn't realize at that time, and just the prayers and the words of encouragement that came from that. And then I remember, too, they made tonight we're going to do a call for those that want to serve in missions. And so I was helping lead one of the small group Bible studies. And, they're like, are you going to stand up? Like, no, I'm not going to stand up. I don't feel God's calling me to do that. And I don't think you need to stand up just because you're at a missions conference. So that night during the service, they did the call. And the next thing I know, I'm standing up. And I was like, what happened? Because I didn't, it wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to stand up. I had said no in the morning. And the next thing I knew, I was standing up. And then the last night of that conference, they had different videos of different works. And I remember seeing children in Africa that had been, lost limbs and different things from all the different wars and violence. And I just broke down crying because, I was just like, wow, they don't have people to help them. And I have the skills to help them. And I just said, God, if you want me to use my physical therapy skills on the mission field, I will. But it took a while. I went back to Corpus. I was all excited, but I kind of kept with that job. I ended up getting a different job. I ended up going to a different church. At that church, I went to their Bible school. I started doing an internship. I went from working full-time to 2 days a week. Then after I graduated from the Bible school, they invited me to stay on as a missionary. So, which basically meant I was working but not making any money. And they gave me a place to stay, which was very helpful. And during that time, I felt like God said to stop working. So there was about a 6-month period where I wasn't even working at all. Now, even when I was working 2 days of work, because unfortunately, sometimes U.S.-based missionaries have an even harder time raising the financial support that they need. And I was doing stuff, and so I was basically just making as much money as I was getting those 2 days a week. And so I remember I would pay all my bills, I would put some money in an envelope, and then I would give my credit card and my checkbook to the lady at the church and say, I don't need to spend more than I have. And then it was even harder after I stopped working. And I remember there was one Sunday I just really wanted to go to lunch with friends after church because that's what everybody did as the fellowship time. We didn't do meals together. We went out to eat, and I didn't have money to go out to eat. And some friends were like, hey, come join us for lunch. And I was kind of like, well, no, and they were like, no, we are going to pay for your lunch. And it just felt like a gift from God. Like, I know your heart's desires, and I'll provide what you need. And all that time, I always had what I needed. Maybe didn't all have the things I wanted all the time, but I always had what I needed. And even when I didn't work for 6 months, and I felt then God said, no, it's time to go back to work. It was probably a month or so after I went back to work that I had some car problems and had to get a different car. But I didn't get the job because I needed a car. I got the job and then the car problems. And it was just that reminder of God's provision and God's faithfulness. And while I was at the church, I was the assistant director of the Bible school. I directed the Bible school. We started doing mission trips to Mexico to build houses. I helped with a youth group in the Philippines. I went to China, went to Mozambique. And there's a picture up here. Oh, the next one, sorry. And got to use my physical therapy to teach some people in Mozambique how to work with the children with disabilities at their orphanage. Even had the opportunity to go to, Uganda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and our Bible school was a video-based curriculum. And so, on the next slide, Della, we were able to start 3 different Bible schools over there because we had had one student that had contacted us and wanted to come, and we had tried to bring him to the United States. And I thought, why are we going to bring him here when we could take it to them? So we started some Bible schools there. And it was during that time that I was on staff at the church that my pastor was also the founder of a mission sending organization called Commissioned Every Nation, or C10. And he's like, hey, I've got this missionary in Guatemala, and she needs a team to go build water wells. And it was the last minute, so I was the only one that really had the flexibility to just cancel everything and go. So I went down to Guatemala, and I get there, and she goes, you can't build water wells by yourself. And I'm like, yeah, you don't want me building water wells. So she's like, let's make it a scouting trip. So when you come with the team the next time, you know, you'll know what to do. And she started to introduce me to different people. And she's like, oh, I have these friends, John and Sharon Harvey. They're from Missouri. And they came to Guatemala, and they now have a medical clinic and a Bible school in Chichicastenango, Guatemala. So we went out there, and Sharon found out. Sharon was a nurse. John was a pastor. And Sharon found out I was a physical therapist. And just, you know, after showing me around the clinic, said, you know what? She goes, there's all these children with disabilities. And, you know, what I'm hoping and what I see, like God's leading us to, see this cornfield over here? That land's not for sale, but I believe, and they say they're never going to sell it, but I believe God is going to give us that land. And we're going to build a clinic. And at the end of the clinic, I want a big therapy room with big picture windows to look out over the side of the ravine. You know, so she has poured her whole heart out about what she's seeing, what she's desiring, what she feels God leading to her. And I'm like, oh, that's great. I wonder who's going to do. I mean, I didn't say this to her, but in my head, I'm thinking, that's great. I wonder who's going to do that, because I was doing ministry, right? I was at the church. I was doing all these things. And now physical therapy, that was a worldly thing. And then 2 years later, I was sitting in the office of the church, and by then I've, you know, gotten to go to China. I've been to multiple different countries on multiple short-term trips. And I'm like, you know, this has been great. I even helped start the Awana program. I mean, I had all kinds of different opportunities to do different things. And I thought, this has all been really good, but I think there's something else. And then God reminded me about Urbana and using my physical therapy skills on the mission field. And so I went back and I found a brochure about this thick that had all these different mission sending organizations doing a variety of different things. I'm like, okay, let's find the physical therapy 2 organizations of, like, you know, hundreds and hundreds listed that said they needed physical therapy. So I contacted them. The one wanted somebody to come serve as a professor at a major university in a big city and like somewhere in South America. And I thought, I've been to enough larger countries and larger cities in other countries that, not that there's not always a need for more, but there's people there working. You know, my heart was more drawn to rural, where people didn't maybe want to go as easily. So like that just didn't seem right. The other organization never responded. So then I'm like, oh man, what do I do? So I contacted a large organization that you would all know, because they have doctors doing orthopedic surgeries all throughout Africa, and they're like, no, we don't need a physical therapist. So then I was confused, because I was like, wait, God, I thought, can I use my physical therapy skills on the mission field? And then people were like, oh, maybe you should just go back to school, go become a doctor, become a nurse. And I was like, oh, there's a nursing program in Corpus Christi where I live. So I was making the application, I was getting my transcripts, all that. And then I thought, wait a second. If I could have done that before I went to physical therapy school. So I was just kind of like, what do I do? And then I remembered, oh, there was that lady I met in Guatemala a couple years ago. So I just sent an email and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Jennifer. I came down a couple years ago. I just want to come to Guatemala to see if I could use my physical therapy skills on the mission field. Can I come for 2 weeks? Now, in less than 4 hours, and if you knew technology what it was like in Guatemala at that time, that was a miracle that I had a response. And I think it was even like within an hour or two. And she said, yeah, I'd love for you to come. And she said, I actually just got a grant to start a physical therapy program. So if you'll come train some of our workers in how to provide basic therapy to children with disabilities, we'll pay your way. Now remember, I'm still working at the church as a missionary, and so I'm like, ooh, that sounds helpful. But I was like, so I wrote her back, I'm like, well, I've only worked with adults like in outpatient orthopedics, acute care, and rehab. So yeah, I had pediatrics in school, but that's been a few years ago now. And she wrote back and she said, I don't care, are you willing to come? And I was like, so I just felt, I was like, okay, I feel like God's opened another door, and I can either go through it and see what he has, or I can miss something. So I was like, okay, I'll come. And I remember the last time I was with her, she was in a skirt working in the clinic. So I'm like, oh man, physical therapy in a skirt. How are we going to do that? I got to figure this out. So I called a friend. I'm like, hey, can I borrow some of your broomstick skirts? Because I naturally don't just wear skirts naturally. And I'm like, then I can kind of fold them between my legs and figure out how to be on the floor and working with people in a skirt. And loaded those all up, got the suitcase, grabbed all my notes from PT school, got down there. She had stuff in Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish, so she was going to be my translator. And that first day, or the day before, I was like, okay, and I've got all my skirts. I'm ready to go. And she goes, skirts? You can't do physical therapy in a skirt. I've told all the women they have to wear pants. I was like, oh, okay. Now, last minute, for some reason, I had actually done 3 weeks in a pediatric facility when I was in physical therapy school, and my mom had bought me a pair of 101 Dalmatian scrubs. So I had thrown those in the suitcase. So I was thankful. So the whole 2 weeks I was there, I wore the same pair of scrubs every day, and it was great because everybody else wore the same outfit every day for our trainings too. So I think we have a picture of that first training on the next slide. And that first day, I still remember Sharon was like, okay, you have to put your pants on, because they all came in their typical clothes. This is actually one of their typical tops. It's called a whoopeel, and then they have a skirt that's tied together by a belt. And they were just giggling, because for some of those women, they had never put pants on before. And I later found out one of the women that was in that first training was a pastor's wife. And she had to go talk to her husband and talk to the church to make sure it was going to be okay if she put this on for this training. So we spent 2 weeks training them how to work with children. And remember, I had it years ago in school. It wasn't what I was doing normally. And each day it was just like, okay, well, we did this today. Okay, I think we'll do this tomorrow. Okay, we did this today. I think we're going to do this tomorrow. We had 9 children she wanted to start in the program. So during those 2 weeks, I was evaluating them, kind of coming up with a plan and making notes and leaving things that they could do. And on that last day, all 9 children and their family members came back, and I just stepped back and I watched the people that we trained work with them. And a woman came up to me, and I don't even think it was one of the moms. It might have been a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle. In the local language, which isn't Spanish, it's Quiche, because Guatemala has Spanish as the national language, and then the indigenous languages, and there's 17 to 23, depending upon how you divide it up. So 17 to 23 languages within the size of the state of Tennessee. But this woman comes up to me in Quiche. I have no idea what she's saying, and I just start crying. And I just felt like the Lord said, you can go be the physical therapist somewhere, and that's good. Or you can train people in how to help people. And I just felt like, and that was better. And so in 2010, next slide, I moved to Guatemala and started working with this first group of people that we had trained and ran the clinic, and just learned so much. And one of the little guys, this is Josue. He was so that first picture of the lady holding the baby, that was him. He was one of the very first children in our therapy program. And by the way, the couple that had prayed for her husband to come down. That was John and Sharon, obviously, just in case the connection wasn't made. And Sharon later told me, said, I knew you were going to be the person that was going to help me with this. But I just had to wait for God to show you. And I realized I'm so thankful for her and her example of patience and waiting, because she waited over 2 years for me to come. But Josue was one of the first ones that came in our program. And we started the first training. We did it in 2005, and I moved in 2010. And that first year I was there, another lady was helping me, and the mom called her, and she's like, he just won't stop walking. He just won't stop walking. So at 7 years old, he learned to walk. And it was just fun to see that happen in the progress. We've also seen through our training just the confidence. And some of these women some of them have only had the opportunity to get a third grade education. And we've trained men too, but most of them have been women. And they'd be like, oh, like one of the ladies said, I didn't want to do it. My pastor made me come do it. And I was like, I can't do this. And then she just loves it. Now she's like, Jennifer, can I come help you some more? Jennifer, can I come help you some more? And this is her name's Sandra. And she actually told me one time, she said, and it blew me away, she goes, thank you for teaching me how to love my neighbor. And she's very active in our church. And she's a worship leader at her church. And I was like, what do you mean you didn't know how to, She's also the one that called me out in a time when it could have been seen as very hypocritical, because I said she wanted to go with me to Africa, and I said, if you're going to go with me to Africa, you have to eat the food, and you didn't eat your food at this place. Well, I don't like it. I said, it doesn't matter. You eat what's put before you, and that's part of creating the relationships. And so we went out on a house visit, a few months later, and I listened to some of the other missionaries around, and they were worried about the food, and I let that fear come in, and so I didn't eat all my food when we went out there. Now, I think that later she came up and said, hey, why didn't you eat all your food? And I was able to say, you're right, I was wrong. I said, I let my own convictions be swayed by the other people's actions. And thank you for asking me about it. And I was glad she did, because I didn't want to be the person like saying one thing and doing something different. Also, we had done a class by Johnny and Friends, and they have a big ministry to people with disabilities around the world about ministering to people with disabilities that had been convicting to me and the Guatemalan physical therapist that works with us. And we shared it with Sandra and some of the other people on our staff. And they just broke down crying, because they're like, we've been treating people that we've been working with out of pity and feeling sorry for them rather than out of love. And after that, we could start seeing a change just in the whole atmosphere and how they interacted with one another, how they prayed for people differently, how they cared for one another. And we were also to help people realize that people with disabilities need to hear the gospel, that they aren't saved because they have a disability. They aren't angels sent from God to do something else. They are a person. And in the way that they can understand, just like in the way we can all understand, we need to hear the gospel. And we last year had the opportunity, before everything closed down, to share with the Bible school students at SLC a 2-part devotion on how to minister and work with people with disabilities. And so last year, one of them contacted me and said, hey, there's this little boy. Do you think you could help them? I said, well, what? And I said, they're not going to let us travel out there. So she went out with the mom, and she sent me videos, and we were able to give them some help and some assistance. And it just really touched my heart, because she was willing to take the time to go look and help and help and find that help for that family. We've also seen parents in the next one. This little boy started coming to our program, and he had stopped coming. And so we're like, what's going on? So we decided, let's go out and visit and see if they're doing okay, see what's going on. And we found that they'd made these parallel bars. And parallel bars in the clinic is usually just one way, but the dad had made a whole rectangle so he could walk around. And in this picture, he's not talking now, but he was telling his mom, make it tighter, it's too loose. And we were talking to him, and we said, well, you guys haven't been coming for a while. What's going on? Well, we don't think it's helping. It's like, it's not helping? And they're like, no. I said, well, what was your son doing before he started the therapy program? Well, nothing. He was just lying in bed. Okay. So what's he doing now? Well, he's up walking around. And I'm like, so you don't think it's helping? And they really, and they're like, oh, they're like, you're right. But they said, our family has been discouraging us. They're saying, why are you wasting the time and the money to take your son there when you could be working? Because the families, it's an investment, because they're usually at least 30 minutes away. They have to take time off from work. They have to pay for the money for the bus. And they're like, thank you for encouraging us, because our family had been and we just learned the importance of just an encouraging word and helping them to see that there were changes that were happening. And sometimes they're not quite this obvious, and it has to be drawn out a little bit more. Then we had another lady, she actually had Guillain-Barré, which is like a virus, and you can actually become paralyzed and have to be on a breathing treatment, all those kind of things. And so when she first came in, she was in a wheelchair, and she had difficulty walking. She started walking, and then she was having problems with her hand. And sometimes with Guillain-Barré, it's the end. So it's either your hands or your feet. You don't always get all the movement and strength back. But she did all this needlework and different things that she sold in the market, and that's how she made her livelihood. So she wanted to be able to do that. And I remember giving her clay putty one day, and she just was crying, and I felt bad because I was like, and I was just like praying, Lord, like, please let her strength come back. Well, some of those bracelets that are on the table, she didn't make those, but she came in one day with those, and she had made those. When we had our 10-year anniversary celebration, she brought us this as a gift. But even more than that, while she was working with us, her husband left her. And she would be often the one that would come in and give an encouraging verse or prayers. And she invited somebody into her home and took them in the middle of her struggle with her husband leaving her. And so she was great, an example of God's faithfulness and just an encouragement to us as well. And then another time we went back to Uganda, and this time we were invited to do a physical therapy training while the pastor did a training for the pastors in the area. And then after we do our training during the day, they invited us to go visit the churches. And we went to this one church, and everybody came up and was giving us this big bear hugs. And I was like, not that they weren't usually excited to see us, but this was like beyond the normal excitement. And we were kind of like, what's going on? And they said, we were praying and fasting, and we had this vision that these two white people came out to this area. But we were really confused because no white person would ever come out here. Well, me and my friend Aaron just show up. And they were like, we are encouraged now, and we're going to keep seeking after God. And the only reason we were out there is because God said to go to Uganda, and we followed him. I think some of the most meaningful words to me that Jesus said is, come, follow me. And I feel like it's just one step at a time. Even when people don't understand, I was telling Dale last night, I remember, especially when I wasn't working in physical therapy and I was doing all this stuff, Larry one time said, I don't know, or before I moved to Guatemala or came back one of those times, he said, there was a time I didn't know what you were doing. I thought you were kind of crazy, but now I can see that God was working it out all the time. And I said, yeah, I was just following to the best of my ability. It didn't make sense to me all the time either. So because of the pandemic, it actually has helped us narrow in and focus our vision and come up with a plan that we feel we can train people more effectively. We had been working on written manuals, and as you can tell, I like to tell stories, so they can get pretty long. And, when you can't go places and do different things, Guatemala was one of those countries that was pretty shut down. The borders were closed for like 7-9 months. We couldn't travel between the states. There's all kinds we had curfews. There were 2 weekends in a row specifically where we couldn't even leave the house. And so I'd been on different Zoom meetings with different leaders and different things, and it dawned on me, is like, why don't we start putting some of our trainings on videos? And even though not everybody has access to electricity or internet, it's like expanding exponentially that they do. There's ways, there's solar chargers. And most of the time, we train people that are connected with another organization, whether it's a church, a school, And so they likely have internet, and so we could create something that they could download and upload, whether it's an app or on some other kind of server, and they could go in, get what they need to come out. They could watch some of the videos, which allows them to kind of maintain their other schedule, and then we come in for the hands-on part training, because obviously you can't do physical therapy without learning how to do some of the things hands-on. But we thought, well, that would help the training go more quickly. It would require less in-person time for us as the trainers, but also for the people. But then it also, because I was like, how are we going to multiply this? How are we going to get other people involved? And I'm like, if we create the videos in English and Spanish, then people in the States that might want to come and help us do training can watch the English videos first to see what the people we have trained know and how we're presenting it, so that when they come in and help us with teaching how to do the actual activities, we're all on the same page. So for the last year, we've been spending a lot of time. So I have a Guatemalan physical therapist that works with me, and we pay her salary. And so the 2 physical therapists have suddenly become, script writers, camera people, video editors, and doing all these things. And so I thought I'd end this morning with showing you a couple of different videos. And the first one, too, the people that we've already trained, one way, too, to help them out economically during that, because we felt like our responsibility was with the people that we had worked with, we get them involved in some of the trainings. And so this first video shows an idea that they came up with when we needed some help for creative ideas. Simple, short, but I think it communicates you need to check how much something weighs, you need to make sure the path's clear, and you need to remove obstacles, right? In a fun, dynamic way, without us just saying, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this, we can go review it, and it was funny because Shez and I were that's our Guatemalan PT, we're what can we do that would be fun and creative, and then we're I'm why do we do, why do we keep figuring this out? Go back, let's go ask them, because they're the ones that have taught us to be better teachers. It's the people that we train in that first class. I apologize to them all the time. I'm I'm sorry. You should be in the classes now, because I think you would learn much more, because I know what I'm doing now. To a certain degree, I've made it easier. I understand how things are in Guatemala. And so they came up with that idea in 30 seconds. And they've done other ones. We had another one where they had to act out these communication things or do a charades type game. That was one of our activities for talking about communication. And I remember Shez telling me, yeah, I thought I was going to have to make sure they did all the facial expressions and all this. But she goes, they did it perfectly. The one was practicing working in the field, with their hoe. And she'd go like this. And then she'd go like this. And she goes, it was one take for each one of those. So we learned we're not the actors. We let them do that, because they are great at it, and they come up with those fun ideas. Or sometimes we have the creative ideas, and they put it into action. And then here's one, just when we talk to people about our perspective and people with disabilities and how we want to work with them. Yeah, we just sit in silence and let you think about it. What we would do, actually, we would spend some time saying, think about what your experience has been with people with disabilities. What have you learned from your culture? What have you learned from movies, TV? And then compare that with God's word, and how is it similar? How's it different? Okay, so we'll skip that one. But basically, I'll just give you a summary, and that one was in English. But just that everyone's created in the image of God for a purpose. And so we want to give everybody the opportunity to develop that purpose to the fullest of their potential. And a great way to do that is with the physical therapy that allows people to have the mobility to do and things that maybe before they were, because a lot of times what I found in our area of Guatemala is people don't know what to do, so they just leave people lying in bed. And it can be a child with a disability, it can be an adult after they've had a stroke. And, lying in bed is the worst thing that you can do. And so part of the thing is in addition to providing those therapy services, we were like, okay, let's be advocates for the rights of people with disability, for all people, to be active participants in their community, and to be able to get into church because, accessibility is not anything. And a lot of times when we give people a wheelchair, it's not so that they can get around, it's because it's a seating device. Because if you live on a mountain, and you have the narrow, similar to like the cow pass, and that's how you get to and from your house, but you're going up and down the mountain, it's hard to do. So, then the last one is going to be in Spanish. And this one just is on like active listening.
¿Qué le pareció de la última actividad? ¿Entendió lo que se estaba comunicando? Recuerde, definimos la comunicación como un intercambio de información entre dos personas. La comunicación no solo es las palabras que decimos, sino también cómo las decimos. En este video discutiremos cómo el lenguaje corporal, las expresiones faciales y la escucha activa son partes importantes de la comunicación efectiva. Lenguaje corporal. Lenguaje corporal es la comunicación a través de los movimientos y acciones de nuestro cuerpo. Por ejemplo, si alguien está enojado, podría pararse más alto y hacerse más grande. O si alguien está asustado.
And I want to show you that one too, because 5 years ago when I was talking to a friend of mine about writing these manuals and different things, he's like, oh, you're going to need an illustrator. Do you know an illustrator? I'm like, no. He goes, oh, I don't either. He goes, okay, we need to put that on the prayer column. Like, you need to pray for an illustrator. Well, Shez is our Guatemalan physical therapist. She drew those. So we have several animated videos that she's drawn, and it's been a huge gift and a joy to watch her use her creativity in that way. And for her, because I asked her, I'm like, is this hard? Because you're now, what was kind of your hobby, and like you're now using. She goes, no, I'm really enjoying it, and coming up with the ideas and the different themes. And I always just like to accentuate her gifts and talents that way. So I'll end with this: how can you help? There's always 3 ways you can help. You can give, you can pray, you can go. And giving can be financial, which is always needed because there's, ministry, doing things, just things cost money. There's my expenses, there's our travel expenses, there's the development of the curriculum and the resources for that. We have our full-time Guatemalan physical therapist that we, pay. And as we do more trainings, it's more travel. And some of that will be within Guatemala. But my big vision is it's going to be other countries as well. And so there's expenses with that. But then there's also people, keep in touch, be an encouragement. Maybe you have skills with producing videos or, graphic designs, those kind of things. We're always looking for help with that. I'm the founder and executive director of Therapy Clinics International, and it is a nonprofit, so maybe you have some accounting or those kind of skills. I can always use help with that. So those are all different ways you can help. Obviously, praying for the people that we work with, praying for the opportunities, praying for the right doors. Last year, I went to our Guatemalan PT team, like, how do we define success? And I think she was looking at me like, is this a trick question? And I said, no, success to me is that we've spent time sitting with Jesus. And so that every partnership and every person and place where we go, that we know that is where he's directed us to go. And it doesn't matter if it serves 1 or 1,000. We don't measure success by the numbers of people. We let him be in charge of the numbers of people. We just go where he says. Because it's really, that, when parable talks about leaving the 99 to go after the 1. Or like we've had medical teams come in, it's great, and we do want to reach as many people as we can, but sometimes I've seen in some of the, especially developing nations, it's easier to go to some areas and you can see lots of people, but then there's 5 people out in a community that are never going to get the help. And my heart is for those 5 people. So you can pray and go. So right now, we won't be bringing anybody till next year. And initially, it'll probably need to be people that have some kind of skills that can help us in the trainings, whether it's PT, OT, speech, maybe nursing, medical, or some familiarity with that in some time. But as we develop some of these more, I want to bring teams that can maybe partner with the people that we are partnering with to help them with a project, so that people can come down and kind of experience the culture, get an understanding of the culture, that people see the work that we're doing in physical therapy, but then also be a service and a blessing to that community as well.